Financial Survival Network, helping you to survive and thrive in the new economy. Get our complimentary newsletter at financialsurvivalnetwork.com. This is the Financial Survival Network.
This is Kerry Lutz, the financialsurvivalnetwork.com, 1230 WBZT, and it's time for another Triple Lutz Report. This is episode 283. It is July 23rd. Really interesting article that appeared in the Wall Street Journal a couple of days ago, something that you need to think about, entitled Rise of the Warrior Cop by Radley Balko. And maybe it's not just my imagination, but the divide between the police and the people they supposedly serve has been getting wider and wider. And he starts out with a story. January 4th of last year, a local narcotics strike force conducted a raid on the Ogden, Utah home of Matthew David Stewart at 8:40 p.m. The officers, acting on a tip from Mr. Stewart's former girlfriend, who said that he was growing marijuana in his basement, he awoke naked to the sound of a battering ram taking down his door, and thinking that he was being invaded by criminals, as he later claimed, he grabbed his 9mm Beretta, started firing, and the police said that they knocked and identified themselves. Well, you've seen enough episodes of Cops and all those other shows on TV. You make your own judgments, but Stewart and his neighbors said they heard no such announcement. Stewart fired 31 rounds. The police fired 250 rounds. 6 of the officers were wounded, so obviously Stewart was a better shot than them. 1 officer was killed. Stewart himself was shot twice before he was arrested, and he was charged with several crimes, including the murder of one of the officers. And the cops found 16 small marijuana plants in Stewart's basement, and there was no evidence that Stewart, a U.S. military veteran with no prior criminal record, was in fact dealing marijuana. And Stewart said, his father said that his son suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder and may have smoked marijuana to self-medicate. So the Ogden City Council heard complaints from dozens of citizens about the way that drug warrants are served in the city. And for Stewart, his trial was scheduled. Prosecutors, of course, were seeking the death penalty. He lost a hearing on the legality of the search warrant, and he then hanged himself in a jail cell. And we've been seeing a militarization of the police since the 60s. Now, obviously, the police are under more threats. More police are getting killed in the line of duty. On average, I think it's 1 cop a week is killed in the line of duty. A lot of those deaths take place in driving accidents, not usually in shooting cases. That is a fact. You can Google it. But 1 cop a day, 1 cop a week, whatever it is, it's too many. However many are killed in the line of duty. And a lot of cops that I know are good people. I mean, I hang out with them in Starbucks in the morning. And even my little town here in Palm Beach County has got its own SWAT force. And I don't really see a need in this town for a SWAT force. It's kind of absurd. And since the 60s, the cops have been arming up at every level of government. There's this martial rhetoric and the availability of military-style equipment with, assault rifles. Citizens are not the only ones with assault rifles. They're getting armored personnel carriers. They're getting military surplus equipment, the war on drugs, and post 9/11 anti-terrorism has figured into larger budgets for cops. So the warrior cop, armed to the teeth, ready to deal harshly with wrongdoers. It's a growing threat to your liberties and to mine. And the acronym of SWAT, which stands for Special Weapons and Tactics, these units have cropped up all over the place, and they're a growing threat to all of our liberties, yours and mine, and it needs to be dealt with. Interestingly enough, where do you think the first SWAT team was born? The first SWAT team came in L.A., and that was in the 60s. By 1975, there were 500 such units. Today, there's thousands of them. According to criminologist Peter Kraska, just 13% of towns between 25,000 and 50,000 people had a SWAT team in 1983. By 2005, the figure was 80%. And there's just no way that 80% of these towns need to have a SWAT team. It's just a question of budgets feeding them, and it's another perverse result of the war on drugs. Totally unnecessary. The number of raids conducted by SWAT-like police units has grown also. In the 70s, there were a few hundred per year. By the early 80s, there were 3,000 a year. And in 2005, which was the last year for which this guy Kraska collected data, there were 50,000 such raids per year, which comes out to several hundred per day. And then you've got these federal agencies with very benign purposes like the Fish and Wildlife Service, NASA, the Department of the Interior. In 2011, the Department of Education, their SWAT team bungled a raid on a woman who was initially reported to be under investigation for not paying her student loans, though, of course, the agency later said she was suspected of defrauding the federal student loan program. But, a knock on the door and say, you're under arrest probably would have been enough. And, why does the Department of Education need to have a SWAT team? None of these federal agencies that have SWAT teams responded to the author of the article's request for information about why they considered the necessity for having a SWAT team. And that in itself should show you that the government is beyond accountability at this point. And from the founding of the country to the present time, Americans have always been wary of using the military for domestic policing. I mean, it goes back to the creation of the Constitution. The founders were worried about the concept of the standing army and using the army to intimidate people. Look at Waco, look at Ruby Ridge, all of those exercises of militaristic power over the common people, totally in keeping with the founders' fears of what an out-of-control government, executive, and Congress, too, for that matter, is capable of doing. And then the author goes back to the history of the first SWAT team in L.A., which arose because of civil unrest and strife during the 60s. Daryl Gates, who was then an inspector with the Los Angeles Police Department, eventually became the chief, the commissioner. He wanted the department to be able to respond aggressively to incidents like the 1965 Watts riots. And obviously you saw how well that worked out when the Rodney King riots broke out. The LA Police Department basically turned tail and ran when those riots broke out. So he kept trying to push this thing through. Each commissioner basically told him to take a hike, but finally a new chief came in and said, yeah, you know what, Daryl, that sounds like a great idea. You go ahead and do it. And then these SWAT teams became popularized by television. No accident there. Corporate media says, oh yeah, let's glorify this militaristic police department. And now you've got them all over the place. Nixon comes in, tough-minded law enforcement, war on drugs, all this stuff. Congress passes a law authorizing no-knock raids for federal narcotics agents in 1970. And eventually, in 74, this was repealed, but the policy made a comeback again, this time without congressional authorization. And then along comes the Reagan administration. They like SWAT teams, and we got SWAT teams coming back. And it gets worse and worse. So we're going to talk more about the evolution of the militarization of the United States police force. I think this goes hands in hand with the de-emphasis and the elimination of the county police sheriff, who used to be the highest ranking police official in each county. He's been eliminated. The police commissioner is now an appointed official by most cities and in many towns across the country. And now it seems like the police sheriff has kind of been diminished over time. So we'll talk about that more next. It's Kerry Lutz, Financial Survival Network.com, 1230 WBZT.
Hi, it's Kerry Lutz. I recently decided to move my retirement account into physical precious metals to hedge against the coming times. If you want to move an existing retirement account into physical precious metals that you can hold in your hand, tax-free, there's no company that can do it more quickly and efficiently than Regal Assets. It took them just 24 hours to open my new IRA account, and all I had to do was fill out one simple form. The best part is that Regal Assets does all the work for you. They cover the setup and administrative costs for 2013. If you're interested in making the same move I did, call 855-678-6620, 855-678-6620. That's 855-678-6620, or visit them at regalassets.com. You'll be glad you did, and tell them Kerry sent you.
We are back. This is Kerry Lutz on the Financial Survival Network, 1230 WBZT. Don't forget, go to Radio Liberty Express. You can hear our shows full 2 hours each day of the Financial Survival Network. Our friend Alan Butler runs that station. A lot of great stuff on there. It runs 24/7. If you're like me, you can't get to sleep. Happens a lot. There's always Freedom Radio there for you. You need to listen to it. It's really good stuff. A lot of great hosts on there. I listen to it regularly, and good things on there. So where were we? So Reagan seems to embrace this. You know, you've got National Guard helicopters and joining the war on drugs. You've got U-2 spy planes looking for marijuana plantations in California, and battle-clad troops from the National Guard and the DEA all joining this war on drugs. It's the exercise in futility. It doesn't do any good. Nothing is stopping the country's insatiable appetite for drugs. All of its failure. Nothing does any good. And the advocates of these tactics said that drug dealers were acquiring ever more larger weapons, bigger arsenals, and the police needed to stay a step ahead in this arms race. And there were indeed a few high-profile incidents in which the police were outgunned, but no data really existed suggesting that they were widely outgunned. I mean, you know, this is just PR by the evil dark forces trying to create a problem where none exists, to give the state, give the cops more force, more arms, more control over you, over your life. And in fact, studies done in 91 by libertarian-leaning the Independence Institute found that less than 1/8 of 1% of homicides in the U.S. were committed with a military-grade weapon, and subsequent studies by the Justice Department and the National Institute for Justice also came to similar conclusions. The overwhelming majority of serious crimes in the country then and now are committed with handguns, and they're not particularly powerful handguns. You're talking 22s, 25s, 32s, 38s, some 9mm, bigger handguns, but generally Saturday night special ones. Criminals like handguns that they can easily conceal in their waistbands, in their pockets, as do honest, law-abiding citizens. So then what happens? 9/11, okay? The worst act of terror ever to occur on U.S. soil, and not just because all these people got killed, mind you, but it really dealt your freedoms and my freedoms the biggest hit to your freedoms and mine ever, because then there's a new rationale for cutting back on your freedom, more snooping, more NSA, all that stuff. And the Department of Homeland Security, this Hydra-headed thing, it's got 85 gazillion heads on it. They're giving money, $35 billion in grants to local police department to further militarize them, to give them gear, to give them armored personnel carriers. I mean, Homeland Security alone has got 2,700 mini tanks, mine-resistant vehicles that they got back from the military that were used in Iraq. I mean, what do they need 2,700 tanks for? It's disgusting. In 2011 alone, the Pentagon has a program for bolstering the capabilities of local law enforcement, and they gave away $500 million worth of equipment. And, that means armored personnel carriers and machine guns and, all sorts of horrible things to infringe your liberties with. And the past decade has seen an alarming degree of mission creep for U.S. SWAT teams. They now seem to specialize in breaking up and shutting down local poker games. Number of police departments have responded by deploying SWAT teams to raid games in garages and basements and VFW halls where suspected illegal gambling is taking place. And it's disgusting. I mean, conversations, reports with poker organizations, there have been dozens of raids like these in cities such as Baltimore, Charleston, and Dallas. I mean, how do they justify this? In 2006, a 38-year-old optometrist, Sal Culosi, was shot and killed in Fairfax County, Virginia, by a SWAT officer because an undercover detective overheard Culosi wagering on a college football game with some buddies in a bar, and they sent a SWAT team after Culosi, who had no prior criminal record or any history of violence. So this is what these SWAT teams are being used for, to raid poker games, local poker games. If you've ever had a neighborhood poker game, I guess you now have to have a lookout for the police, because they might just decide that your game is worthy of being raided. And local federal agents, the Fish and Wildlife Service, raided the floor of the Gibson Guitar Factory. That one was well publicized. SWAT team on suspicion of using hardwoods that had been illegally harvested in Madagascar. Gibson settled that in 2012. They paid a $300,000 fine and admitted to violating the Lacey Act, whatever the heck that is. And how do they justify this? Certainly a letter to Gibson's attorneys saying they violated it could have settled the whole thing. How much does it cost them to send out a SWAT team? Got to be tens of thousands of dollars. I mean, I remember a few months ago, I was looking at houses in the neighborhood, thinking of renting a different one, and the realtor and I come down the street, and there's cop cars all over the place in my little town, dozens of cops in SWAT regalia, and said, what's going on here? Well, so-and-so doesn't want to come out of his house. I mean, I don't know whether it was a necessary use of force or not, but I do know that in this neighborhood, there generally are not a lot of violent felons residing, and seemed like a case of overhaul. You know, it just seems like this whole SWAT thing is totally out of hand. And the guy gives another example of the absurdity of it. In 2006, some Tibetan monks had overstayed their visas while visiting America on a peace mission. In Iowa, the holy men were apprehended by a SWAT team in full gear. And this thing is getting worse and worse. It often results in needless bloodshed. Innocent bystanders have lost their lives, and so too have police officers who were thought to be assailants and were fired on, as in the case of Matthew David Stewart. And in the author's own research, he collected over 50 examples in which innocent people were killed in raids to enforce warrants for crimes that were either nonviolent or consensual, such as drug use or gambling, in which all parties participate voluntarily. And victims are often bystanders, or police later found there was no evidence of the crime in which they were investigating. And there was a 92-year-old woman killed by an Atlanta narcotics team acting on a bad tip from an informant. An 11-year-old shot by a California SWAT officer during a drug raid. A guy killed in 2011 in Massachusetts by a raid on his team. I mean, the list goes on and on. It's excessive police measures. It needs to be rolled back. Aside from needing to take a look at this whole war on drugs, which is really a war on the populace. It happened in the war on alcohol. It always happens when there's a war on something, well, just like the war on poverty, but that's a story for another day. You know, we need to really get rid of this stuff, legalize all this stuff, get these police out of the military business. They're not very good at it. Needless, innocent people get killed, and we need this stopped. You know, the mayor of New York, Nanny Bloomberg, he also thinks he's a general. He said before, I have my own army in the NYPD, the 7th largest army in the world. Well, I got news for you, Nanny. The NYPD is not an army. Their purpose is to protect and serve. And look, I'm not an anarchist, but I'll tell you what, if these police forces are being militarized for some other purpose than protect and serve, maybe they're right. Maybe we are better off with private police forces, because at least the Pinkertons, you knew enough to stay the heck away from them because they were dangerous people, and there was a good chance they were going to kill you if you tangled with them. But, you know, if our police forces are getting to that point, then we need to really start taking a close look at what the heck is going on here, because, you know, something bad is really happening in society here, and things are really going down the tubes quickly. So let's take a look here. Let's scale back the mission of the police force to catch the bad guys, not to overreact to societal problems. Let's get rid of the war on drugs. It's become too big an excuse for going after the common person and violating your rights and violating your privacy, doing things that were never envisioned by the founders, and taking away your rights, putting you in jail for things that are just not right. So up next, a couple of things I want to talk about a couple of things about Obamacare and a couple of things about Detroit. So it's Kerry Lutz, financialsurvivalnetwork.com, 1230 WBZT.
Hi, it's Kerry Lutz. I recently decided to move my retirement account into physical precious metals to hedge against the coming times. If you want to move an existing retirement account into physical precious metals that you can hold in your hand, tax-free, there's no company that can do it more quickly and efficiently than Regal Assets. It took them just 24 hours to open my new IRA account, and all I had to do was fill out one simple form. The best part is that Regal Assets does all the work for you. They cover the setup and administrative costs for 2013. If you're interested in making the same move I did, call 855-678-6620, 855-678-6620. That's 855-678-6620, or visit them at regalassets.com. You'll be glad you did, and tell them Kerry sent you.
We are back. I'm Kerry Lutz on the financialsurvivalnetwork.com, 1230 WBZT. And, God, what else? There's so much happening on. Well, look, the Obamacare thing, it keeps getting bigger and bigger. The unions are turning against it. It's getting to the point where these hapless Republicans in the House and the Senate, I mean, they're totally impotent. They are good for nothing. They are really useless, and they're just part of the governing ruling class. They could have stood up many times and defunded this thing. They had so many things available to them to really just stop this thing dead in its tracks, but they didn't have the guts to do it. I don't know that they still do, but they're talking about a government shutdown. They're talking about proposing spending bills, sending them to the Senate and to the president, funding everything except Obamacare. Look, guys, if you're going to start defunding stuff, defund all this garbage that the government's doing and shouldn't be doing, and get rid of it and really crack down on spending. But I guess if you're going to really get serious, get rid of Obamacare while you're at it. I mean, the whole entire country is against it, from the medical profession on up. But you got to come up with some solutions here. And the solution for our medical problems is getting the government out of it, making medical care much more widespread, allowing more people to get into becoming medical providers at many different levels, from doctors on down. We need more medical schools. It needs to become more affordable to go to medical school. We need quick and dirty medical school where you can go for different types of medical doctor degrees. You need to break the AMA's hold on certifying these medical schools, because that's what's artificially restricted the supply of doctors. Same with nurses. There's no reason a nurse needs to go to college for 4 years, maybe not even 2 years, maybe not even for a year. Maybe they just need medical training for a year or two just in nursing, and they don't need all these other courses. Yes, they do need to read and write. They do need some ability to perform calculations, and they need some math skills, but really they need to be able to treat people for ailments. And you need a lot of different types of medical providers to provide a lot of different services. Increase the supply of those people, and you will see the costs go way, way down. Allow those people to either bill insurance or to collect payment directly from the patient, and you'll see costs go down. Get the government out of it, get insurance companies out of it, let people pay the providers directly for the services that are rendered, and, get the government out of this stuff, because tell you what, the two areas where costs have increased faster than any other costs, where they've increased so many times faster than inflation, you know what they are? Education and medical care. And you know what those two have in common? The payer for the bulk of those services comes down to Uncle Sam or state and local governments. Okay? Most of the payments that take place, either through loans or grants in education, come from the government, both state and local and federal. And guess what? Medicine, most of the payments that take place, state and local governments paying for them, and the federal government. Once you change that, you will see that the rises will slow way down. In fact, introduce some competition, and you will see that the costs go way down, the prices, you will see innovations go way, way up, and you will see that more and more people get the care that they need, that they want, and you'll see that people's quality of care goes way up and their health goes way up. And no, Mayor Bloomberg, people are not living 3 years longer in New York City because of anything you or the Department of Health or New York City's hospitals have done. I guarantee you there are other reasons revolving around better drugs, better care being meted out by the medical establishment, better surgeries, and probably better anesthesia, a whole host of things that you, my narcissistic little friend, have absolutely nothing to do with. This has been another Triple Lutz Report. Kerry Lutz signing off.
The Financial Survival Network, helping you to survive and thrive in the new economy. Get our complimentary newsletter at financialsurvivalnetwork.com. This is the Financial Survival Network.